Hello, welcome back to my Alteryx Intermediate class. We're going to be doing section 1 today, which is creating a data profile. Just want to remind you that for further information about this course, as well as how to get access to its different pieces, take a look at the introduction. It explains to you how to get to the files, what's going on overall with this class, as well as it presents a little bit more details about the syllabus. And in today, we are going to simply look at creating a data profile, which is to a degree a simple task, but will allow us to talk about multiple things along the way as far as how to use Alteryx, especially in the more intermediate fashion. So let's talk about creating a data profile. My buddy John Q just simply has seen a data set that comes in, which has to do with the puppy veterinarian encounters, which is puppies heading to the vet to get care or stay overnight, things like that. And he wants to see a little bit more in a reporting standpoint as far as the data profile of this data as it comes in. This is very useful for you to be able to generate and control what you see from a data profile outside of what the browse does. Again, browse is a wonderful tool. It does a lot, but it's not something that you can use to generate reports from. Also, if you have a base ETL process to where that your ETL runs automatically overnight and you wonder how it did in the morning, this is a good thing to run at the end of your ETL process, is to look at the data that has been being fed into the processes to figure out the constituency, how many records, the accuracy of the records, etc., and to measure that change over time to make sure that your data that's coming in is accurate and useful. As such, just take a look out here at the Puppy Veterinarian Encounter. It has the encounter ID, the puppy ID. It has puppy name there just for a reference point. It has the name of the clinic that saw the puppy, the date and time of that visit, what type of visit it was, whether it be one of these different versions, the location code, as well as how long the puppy was at the veterinarian if they were there overnight or for more days. And what John Q wants to see, is always good to look at the result on the outside, is something along this line where we actually have the fields that within this table, the data types, the number of non-nulls, the number of nulls, the size, a list of unique values if it's small enough to process, the total number of unique values within each attribute, the percentage of nulls that are in that file, as well as the percent that are not nulls. You can actually derive one from the other, but it's nice being able to visually see these. So what we're going to look at is some of the things to do to build this workflow, as well as some discussion along the way as to what you can do and what you can see and how this all works. Two of the takeaways right up front that we want to see, one is that you need to expand yourself out of your favorites and into some of these other. There's a lot of widgets in here. They do a lot of different works. There's pretty much possibly one that does exactly what you need it to do, but keeping that in mind, the second point is that there are many ways to get the job done. You choose a way that makes sense to you. It gets the job done. It runs in an efficient manner. You're finished. You don't have to look at a better way. Someone else comes along later and says, hey, I would do it this way. And it's like, great, you do it that way. I'll do it my way. We both get the proper result at the end of the day. And so we're going to look at a couple of those different ways of seeing alternatives to getting your workflow completed. So let's go ahead and start this workflow. Obviously, we're starting a workflow. We need to bring data in, and we want to bring in our puppy encounter. There's a couple ways of doing that, not the least of which is that I've already used this. If I come up here and drag my input data widget in, and I click on the drop down box, you'll see that we already have that here because I've been working with it, which is sort of a cheating way to go because I've been working on this for a while. We'll go ahead and delete that out, and let's go with the way that this originally started, which is bringing in a file browser, and I can simply take my puppy encounter spreadsheet and drop it right in there. There we go, and it creates its own little input. Very, very useful way of getting things started, as you can see. So given this set of data, let's go ahead and take a look at what's there. This is coming in from a spreadsheet, and as such, It's not completely accurate for what it wants to be. It's nice to be able to fix this a little bit on the way in to make some of the processing more direct and straightforward. And I can simply do this or not do this as the saying goes, but I just want to myself go ahead and change this to make it a little bit more accurate, make sure my data looks the way I expect it to, and changing some of the sizes to make them right size, which is something that Alteryx talks about, makes your workflows run faster. If you have a large amount of data, we have 2,000 records in this data set. It is not large. We can be as wasteful as we want to, but just going forward, it's nice to know what the data looks like and whether or not it matches up to our expectations. As you can see, all I'm doing here is going down through here, choosing each of these and setting the data types a bit more accurately. Once I've done that, I will run it again. We see that the data comes out, has no errors. Click on white space, shows me the log. And the data looks good, looks accurate, things will work. So from that standpoint, let's get our data profile. Well, when I was in the database world, being a DBA or being a database developer, I would create some really wonderful SQL scripts that would do my data profiling. That's been taken out of the way because over here in data investigation, at the very beginning, we have basic data profile. I challenge you to take a look at all of these depending upon what you're trying to do to see out of the data. Some of this is much more advanced statistical analysis of your data sets. Really good if you have a large set of data to see what's going on. I first found out about these by going into data profile. I played with some of the other of these, but my data requirements were never very large, as well as I didn't see a need to go into this further analysis. But seeing this, we can go ahead and run it. A couple of options. This is the limit for the exact count. In other words, if it's more than 10,000 of a nature, stop counting, as well as if the field size return for the unique values is 1,000 or more, go ahead and don't return it as well. This keeps you from getting a little bit too much data out there that you don't necessarily need. So again, clicking on that, running on that, taking a look at the output, we can see that what it does is for each field, it gives us different information, a lot of information in here that you might want to see. I also tend to look at the min and the max along the way when I'm dealing with this. You will see slightly different values or names associated with different data types. So what you see within a date and what you see within an integer might be slightly different, but they're making their best estimate as to what to go ahead and do. So now we have this data. We want to make some organization out of this data so that we can generate some report. So one thing we want to do is we want to get rid of some of this extraneous information that we don't need and simply reduce this data set down to just what we need to be. And for that, we're going to go ahead and show you 3 different ways to do this, ways that I've seen originally, as well as ways that I've developed over time as I found out more about some of the widgets. But it's sort of nice to be able to show you these different methodologies. The first time I built this workflow that I originally thought of, let's go ahead and just simply filter out these bad records. There is nothing wrong with that thought. So we go ahead and we bring up our filter, drop it in here. Obviously, this is not going to be a basic filter. It's going to be something custom. Pointing out some best practices, I need to create this filter. I know what goes in there. I would like to use an editor to make my life a little bit easier rather than edit it right in here. You can't edit it in here. You have functions and variables. Also, if you notice, we have these save and load. One thing we'll look at a little bit later is how these can play out to make your life easier going forward. But I also want to talk about the fact that go ahead and don't be afraid to use an external editing tool. And so to generate this, I went ahead and used one of my favorite editors, which has been around for ancient times, but you can use any of your favorite editors. You can also use OneNote. It's a great place for keeping this data and this information so you can reuse it in the future, as well as document what you did. In this case, I discovered that these are the fields that I wanted, and I went ahead and used my editor to create a name in this list of values. The in is one of the more recent things that Alteryx has added, recent being in the last 2 or 3 years, I guess. And so that is the filter. So if the name is in one of these values, we want to pass it forward. I found it easier to edit it here. Go ahead and copy it and then simply paste it in here. And there is my custom filter done a bit more easily. And as you can see, going through the true, we have the values coming out that I needed to see, and then the false are those other values. It's always a good idea to check the false to see if you left anything out. I had checked this a couple of times. It looks good. I also don't like the documentation associated with it or the annotation, and so just simply limit this out to be a little bit simpler so my workflow can pass forward and see what's going on. So now I have simply the values that I need. Now to do any processing and any reporting off of this, I need to get all of these columns, all of these rows of data in the value into the same column, because I do need to do a calculation to figure out the percentage nulls and percentage not nulls, and to do that I have to have everything in the same row. And it turns out that yes, indeed, Alteryx has a widget for that. Here in the transform, there's a number of fun things you can do with your data. They are very useful. I've used pretty much all of these over the course of time, but in this case, all that I want to use is the cross tab. As the icon shows, the cross tab takes rows of data and turns it into columns. That's exactly what we want, so we can drop it up here. We need to configure it. Again, we want to go ahead and group it. We want everything with the same field name on the same row. The header is going to be name, and it gives me an error saying that it repeated that down there. It just took its best guess. And for the new column, we want to do values. Keep in mind that this is an aggregation function. And so if you have more than one record with the same named attribute, then you need to go ahead and determine how you want to do this. You can choose your type. Sometimes concatenate is exactly what you want to do. In this case, something simple is take the first value. We know we don't have duplicates, so that makes our life easier. We'll go ahead and drop a browse on the end of this just so you can see what the data looks like. Now when we run this through, you can see sure enough, here is our data strung out across a single row for each of the field names or attributes. You notice we're getting a reminder here that the unique values, these is actually a new line separated column so that each of the values is on its own row within that column. Something we don't necessarily want to report with. It's something that we're going to want to fix, but for now we will leave it the way it is. So here's a simple methodology using a filter and then moving it into the cross tab to get the data out. Second thing I want to look at is another sort of quick little tip that I've used. I've done it a number of times in the past for other reasons, some a bit more sophisticated than this. But again, in order to get this data to any type of processing to work, you have to have your data within your workflow. You have to have it combined together. I've seen people create some really sophisticated formulas or workflows where they're trying to deal with the fact that they don't have exactly the data they need to make things easier. And I always caution people, well, that's great, but why don't you go ahead and just simply create the data? And one way of creating data is either to store that data in an Alteryx database file, store it in a spreadsheet, store it in a flat file, whichever makes the most sense for you. But if you're just working with something that's a one-time only hit, don't forget you have this wonderful thing called text input. You can create your own data coming into the stream. And what we want to here is to use that list of values that we want to see to process this with. If we go back to our editor, you can see here they are. So let's go ahead and copy those off right now. And all I want to do is to go back to this and give it an attribute name or field name of name to match what's in the data flow. And then we can simply paste it in there. And so now we have a list of values that we want to use within this data stream. And if we simply use a join, this will also get us a data, so we don't necessarily have to use the filter and the complex filter that's out there. Again, this becomes your choice, what you want to see. We can go right here and make sure that we do not need this extra name. That's just simply there to dig things out for us. We can run this. Look in the join. Here are the values that we need. And we can move onwards from there. You notice also it sorted this data forward as it did the join, so things are going to look a little bit rockier going forward. Possibly a reason not to use this. But once again, having done that, we need to also go ahead and use this step. we can just go ahead and simply copy and paste that widget back again. Remembered everything except for the group by. Being ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and drop the browse on the end of this. Run this and you can see we have basically the same set of results. So it's two ways of getting the job done. When I was playing with this many times ago, I realized that there's some commonality here, and that is this function here. There's a way that's possible a bit more manual, but it does the job as well, and that is simply, let's go ahead and do this. Cross tab. Straight off of the input data. Get that done first. Again, it wants us to choose field name to make sure it goes through there. We run this. Now we have a whole lot more columns than we need, so as you may or may not always remember, we can get rid of those extra ones by coming into the select widget. It's a lot of information here, as you can see. Choose what you want to use. But what we want to do is, from an option standpoint, start out with this deselect everything. So we can just come through here and choose what we want. What we want is field name, data type. As I'm checking my notes, we want the non-nulls. We want nulls. We want the unique values. But before that, we just click on size. We have unique values and we have uniques. That pretty much covers everything that we want to see. We can also take the step right here of going into this and choosing a little bit better data types. Let's make this a v-string of 200. Again, just being a little bit wasteful from the side because we don't really have much data, but it's just nice to clean this up a little bit. We're going to want to do math on the, well, we have size. Let's go ahead and size. Where are my nulls? So there's my nulls and not nulls first. So there we go. There's my nulls and not nulls. We're going to do math with these. So it's really nice to have those as numbers in order to be able to do math. Set those to integers. Size is also an integer. It's what made me think of it. My unique values, we're going to leave that the way it is because I don't know exactly what's going to be in these values. So it's nice to keep a very large string. And my number of uniques is also an integer. Again, if we want to do any calculations, it's nice to have them as an integer. Running this through, you can see that the data coming out is consolidated and looks the way I want it to look. In case I like these other data flows, I can also do something tricky, which is I can copy this, which I find this to be wonderful to do, and I can paste that. Drop it in here, and you see it automatically tagged everything that I wanted it to tag, so I don't have to do any editing. Again, it's a good thing to keep in mind that Alteryx does some great work behind the scenes. If it does what you want it to do, it's great. If it doesn't, it's not quite so good. But in this case, it did what we wanted it to do. Again, this is the two stubs of what I did originally when I started looking at this the first time, but I decided that this was a number of less steps that I had to do along the way. And so what we want to do next is do some of our calculations. We're going to do two things in our calculations. So let's go ahead and drop a formula in there. We want to calculate the percentages. We also want to go ahead and fix that unique values out here. So let's go ahead and calculate our percentages. We want to go ahead and add a new column. We're going to call this new column %null. Spelling always helps. And all I want to do is a simple math. We can slowly build this, hitting the open bracket. We want to go ahead and say this is nulls. And I want to divide that by, this is simply typing in the math. We want to add nulls and non-nulls together. My bad, I made it a little bit too small. Might not be able to see that. So all I'm doing is typing in this formula. times 100. My old programming day says put a period on the end of there. Really doesn't matter for Alteryx. It does the job right anyway. We want to create this as a fixed decimal, and let's go ahead and make it 10.3 just so we can have plenty of room. That's sort of overkill for what we're calculating. So there we have that calculation. You notice up here it gives me the value for the first record coming through it, so I know that I have a good formula typed in. So let's go ahead and put in our second one, which would be %not null. Add a column. Again, the formula looks a lot like the other one. I wanted to show you something else we can do. Down here in the recent and saved expressions, you can see that we have some misnaming starts, etc. going on, but this is what we typed in just last time, which is the nulls. Because all we want to do is change this rather than being nulls. We want it to be the non-nulls divided by nulls. So that gives me the inverse of this, so to speak. I could have done it a different type of math. Again, whichever math works for you. And the last thing we want to do is go ahead and change this unique values, get rid of that line feed and turn it into a comma and a space. Again, a couple ways of doing that, some a little bit tougher than others. This is where I try not to shy away from some of the formulas that you might try to use. I'm going to call this unique values. Ooh, don't want to do a new field. That would just confuse the death out of it. Let's go ahead and change unique values. What we want to do here is going to use two things. We're going to use the regular expression replace in its very simplest form. No real sophisticated processing here. It just does this type of replace with this control character or this embedded carriage return a little bit easier. So let's take our unique values. We want to find a pattern. In this case, it's just really not much of a regular expression. We just want to be able to simply type in the end of line and replace that with a comma and a space, so we have separation. Now the one thing when you run this you'll notice is that this will put a comma and a space on the end of this. We want to get rid of that, and that simply we want to use the trim function. And that will remove that extra, that will remove that extra, to make this bigger, that will give us the ability to remove this extra common space that's on the end of this list, but there's other ways we could do it, but this one seems to be the simplest and most forward one. We want to trim off the comma and the space and replace it with nothing. Whoops, sorry, we're doing a trim. So remove the comma and the space and let it roll through from there. Let's go ahead and change our annotation here because it's going to be a bit ugly, and it is simply calc fields. Let's add a browse on to the end of this. Give this a run through. Nice to know we've got a parse error in expression number 3. What did I do wrong in here? We have regular expression. Oh, we left that comma at the beginning of this to separate out as a parameter. It's nice of it to warn us. You also see, if I had noticed, I would have seen the underbar. Going back to look at this real quickly, making it bigger, you would have seen the fact that it showed me an error, as well as at the time it would have shown me nothing up here as a result. Got a little carried away getting to the end of this. Hit run again. You now have a nice data profiling output that you can save or do some reporting off of. Recommend saving it as a spreadsheet or a YMDB file. You might want to put this in a database so other people have access to it, but it gives us the field, the data type, the number of non-nulls, the number of nulls, the overall size. Again, rearranging this would also be helpful as well. A list of unique values if there's not too many, the number of unique values, which is 5, the percentage that were nulls, and the percentage that were not nulls. So this makes a good place to put this, and if we do this every day on our data set, we can see its growth over time in any of these dimensions and generate some nice reports. Pretty simple. When I would actually save this, I would go ahead and delete these off because I don't need all of these. I don't need that in there as well. So this becomes a much simpler workflow. Putting things here so that you can see them a bit easier if I go ahead and copy and paste this out. So there's my nice data profile workflow. Things you can do with this that would be kind of fun, which I've done as well, which is making this an interactive application to ask you the name of your spreadsheet, and then it would go ahead and do the data profiling for you, because this would work for anything that comes in. Good workflow. You could follow along yourself. I've gotten this workflow and these data set, or this data set, out on my shared drive. Check version of introduction for how that would work. Subscribe so you'll see when I get to part 2 of this, as well as drop any comments for what else you might like to see within this class. It still has been written, but not finalized, so I can always add something more to meet your needs. So this is the workflow that we generated, and in our next session we'll actually repeat something I've done before, but in a bit more simplistic method, as well as in the tutorial style, as opposed to just simply showing you a workflow. And it will be to generate a keyword text file so we can send this data to someone that needs to see it in that structure. Thanks for listening. Hope this helped, and we will see you a little while from now with part 2.